Hello, everyone. I am Mary Hunt at WATER, the Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual, with my colleague Diane New, and also our colleague Wed Naji, who is in Germany, doing the IT for us, handling the live stream as well as the regular WATER talk. And we are joined today by our friend and colleague Kwok Pui-Lan. So it is a time to say from the very beginning, welcome to each and every one of you, and certainly to those who will enjoy this at a later date, because this is not only being live streamed now, but of course it will be videoed and part of our collection of WATER talks. So a warm welcome to everybody on a warm day in Washington. It will be 100 in an hour or two Fahrenheit. So we're happy to be in the nice, cool air conditioning of the WATER office and with all of you. Many of those who will be on the live stream and some who will be here on the WATER Zoom are readers of Pui-Lan's Substack and watchers of her podcasts under the rubric Kwok and Roll. Did you ever hear of a better Substack title than Kwok? And I mean, that really rivals WATER, Pui-Lan, for a great title. That really works. We're delighted to have all of you with us, and glad that you're inclined to join such programs. Please share them with your friends and colleagues. I want to say a word of introduction about WATER for those who are new to our work. We are a nonprofit educational center and public charity in Silver Spring, Maryland, in the U.S., in the Washington, D.C. area. We focus on feminist work and religion. We were founded in 1983, building a growing network of scholars, ministers, and activists around the world who are committed to engaging theological training and scholarship in the service of social change. Let me say that again, and I hope that you feel yourself part of this. Engaging in theological training and scholarship in service of social change. We promote empowerment, justice, peace, and systemic change. We seek to transform religious structures by strengthening women as religious agents and encouraging us to work for inclusive religious communities and an egalitarian future. We do have an international reach, as you can see today, and we promote ecofeminist work. We collaborate and participate in justice networks worldwide, and we're delighted that you're part of our work today. We at WATER begin with a land acknowledgement, something that we've incorporated into our programs to remind ourselves of why we do, and what we need to do more of, given the systemic injustice that Indigenous people and other people of color face in this country. A land acknowledgement is a beginning, not an end, a time to reflect on our history and to commit to justice making. So I begin the land acknowledgement. WATER is on the Indigenous land of Silver Spring, Maryland, traditional and contemporary land of Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge the trauma and injustice towards such people and other people of color that is deeply rooted in American culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate it and to make reparations for the genocide involved. WATER's work, whether intellectual, spiritual, or liturgical, is aimed singly to bring about social justice. I invite you, if you wish, to consider in a quiet moment the Native people on whose land you sit. You're more than welcome to put their names in the chat if you wish, as a way of acknowledging them and reminding yourself of how important it is that we keep this reality at the center of consciousness. We can also take the same moment to acknowledge our unstable and threatening global situation with wars in Kiev, Gaza, and Iran, savaging people there, with the U.S. in the lead on many of these problems. Let us, I think, at least I'm going to dedicate this hour of study and discussion to be directed toward peace and well-being. Feel free to join me in dedicating the hour as well. Thank you. Now we turn to our topic for this day, which is global feminism today. Let me mention the format and then we'll jump right in. The format is a slight variation on the usual WATERtalk format. Instead of having a single speaker, that would be Pui-Lan, both of us will engage, as we have done in her podcast series, Faithful Provocations. We'll engage one another for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for those who wish to add their own thoughts to the mix. Feel free to use the chats, both the Zoom chat as well as the live stream chat, to be part of the larger conversation. We'll be monitoring the chat so that Magdalena, has Magdalena arrived? Do we have Magdalena? No. If not, maybe Wed, you'd keep an eye on the chat and the live stream chat so that we can bring those questions into the mix. Those who are on Zoom, of course, will feel free to raise their hands and ask their own questions once we open the floor. We will continue our discussion until the top of the hour, which will be 2 o'clock Eastern time in the US. Do your own math, and we'll close it officially at that time, but the Zoom will remain open for conversation. We'd like to keep our formal session to an hour to respect everybody's schedules, but we also don't want to cut off conversation. So please listen and enjoy. We will take notes, which will be on our website shortly, along with a video of the session. You can access it by going to Water's website at www.waterwomensalliance.org. Look under programs and teleconferences with today's date and Pui-Lan's name, and feel free to rewatch or share the session with those with whom you work. We'll send these things out in the next week, so you can certainly have access to them in a brief interval. Also, I want to simply say that why we do this work is so that people who are not formally engaged in theological education or in regular studies have the same access to the high quality conversation and the high quality discussion that is going on among feminists in religion. Let me, speaking of high quality, offer a word of welcome and a warm introduction to Professor Kwok Pui-Lan. As many of you know, she came to the US from Hong Kong, where her family practiced Chinese religion. She became Anglican in her teenage years. She did early studies at the Chinese University of Hong Kong and a doctorate at Harvard Divinity School, focusing her early writings on Chinese women and Christianity. For nearly 30 years, she taught at Episcopal Divinity School and then at Candler School of Theology at Emory University. But she's returned to EDS, where she serves as Distinguished Scholar this year. More than 20 books later, she is a prolific scholar, particularly with regard to post-colonial issues. But this is just the tip of a very deep iceberg. Pui-Lan was a distinguished editor of the Journal of Feminist Studies in Religion, president of the American Academy of Religion, and founding member of the Pacific Asian and North American Asian Women in Theology and Ministry, or PAN-AUTUM, an important sister group to Water. Endlessly curious and creative, Pui-Lan has now taken the internet by storm. She has taught herself much of what there is to know about utilizing AI for scholarship and activism. Her popular podcast, Kwok and Roll, and her Substack are now go-to places for information, conversation, and connections. We're delighted that some of her readers and listeners are part of this session today, both on YouTube and hopefully here in the Zoom room. So, Pui-Lan, with that introduction, you might want to just say a quick word, and then I'll move on to the article.
Thank you very much, Mary and Water, for organizing this event. I want to say hello to the friends in Water and also to some of my readers and who subscribed to my Kwok and Roll Substack and YouTube. And this live stream is our first attempt to reach maybe a broader audience. When I began the podcast and also the YouTube channel, and I invited many of my friends, former colleagues, to be my guests. And of course, Mary appeared numerous times. And at one time, we were just so excited. So we started a series that is called Faithful Provocations. Mary, as you know, is always provocative. She is my turn to guru to learn something about what is happening in the Catholic Church, in the Catholic feminist movement, and also other issues and concerns that women across the group and non-binary colleagues are very concerned about, talking about. Today, we celebrate the global movement of feminism. We want to name some of the things that both Mary and I have learned. She working in the Catholic circle and ecumenical circle. I am an Episcopalian working among my Anglican sisters and colleagues, and also participate in many ecumenical gatherings. So we want to begin a conversation among ourselves, but the goal is to invite you into the conversation. because as I grow older, I certainly would be thinking about how we'll pass the baton on to the next generation. Some of them said feminism is per se. This is really grandmother's generation's movement. And they are talking about queer movements. They are talking about other movements too. So we want to hear from your neck of the wood what kind of concerns women and non-binary persons who are on the margin are thinking about, how we can continue to be a resistant movement in a world that is so much controlled by three big countries: United States, China, and of course, Russia. And as many of you know that, there is this growing gap between those who have and the have-nots. For the first time in human history, we have not just billionaire, we have a trillionaire. And how are we going to rise up to the challenges of our time? That is the conversation that we would like to have and invite you to join.
Thank you so much, Pui-Lan. And I want to start the conversation with something that we all have access to, which is your wonderful article, Translating Global Feminism. And you ask the question, can we build a global movement in our time? And I want to just make an observation about the article as a way to kick things off. This is characteristic of your work. I think you've captured and synthesized a lot of important theoretical information in a simple, straightforward article which is easily understood. Very few people can do that. I'm grateful for this, and I can also see that your concentration on feminism and religion makes for a manageable focus in terms of the question of feminism. But let me ask a very pointed question. Is global feminism a contradiction in terms? Or is it a term that has been rendered outdated by the very efforts to broaden what was at the beginning a quite narrow base in the early years of the movement? Do we need to think now instead of many feminisms that have their own flavors and textures, and then find ways to work together that would become what we call a movement? I don't mean this as a semantic question or a question of semantics either, but as a strategic question. As a white US cis educated woman, I see the many ways in which feminism rooted in my culture has, however unintentionally, caused serious harm due to cultural imperialism, continued colonialism, and rampant racism. Of course, we've done a lot of good things, but how do we move forward taking account, especially those of us who are white and from the US, how do we move forward in terms of a movement taking account of this reality?
Thank you very much, Mary, for raising that concern. Remember, during our younger days, there was this slogan, sisterhood is global. Remember that?
Very well.
And then some of us reacted to that as, wow, who defines what is global? I need to tell you, I started learning theology when I was in Hong Kong in the early 70s. Well, talking about women's movement, well, we were observing what was happening in China. 1966 to 1976 was the period we call the Cultural Revolution. Remember, women and men wore the same Mao suit in gray, in dark color, or in blue. And so that was something I also observed as I started to learn about theology and had the opportunity to read some of the Western women's theology in Hong Kong in the 70s. So I began to ask the question, why feminist theology, as I read, especially from the United States, was addressing issues that I did not relate to because of what was happening in China, and that influenced Hong Kong and also our awareness of equality between the sexes. You recall that Mao famously said, women hold up half of the sky. So yeah. I come to understand feminism and its relationship to theology from a very different cultural background. And then in my little article, I talked about in the last 2.5 years, I had the opportunity of visiting different cities in Africa and also in Brazil to dialogue with women of different ages. What are their concerns? How are they relating to feminism or not? And that is why I think about translating global feminism is not translating Western feminism to all those local expressions and manifestations. I was asking the question, how can we understand each other across cultural, linguistic, religious, and other forms of barriers? How can we translate or understand Nigerian feminism or Kenyan feminism? Do we need to be very conscious of our own assumptions and frameworks in order to better cultivate global awareness of women's challenges and non-binary people's concerns today? But one thing I want to ask you, Mary, I know that you spent time in Latin America, did you?
Of
And you
course.
can speak Spanish very well.
Puedo
Because
defenderme un poco.
I constantly needed to wrestle with at least two different languages, right? And I want to share with you, it really sharpened my understanding that people think and talk about their reality in different ways. Can you share your involvement in Latin America and how being fluent in another language helps you to understand?
Well, yes, thank you for bringing that up. I went to Latin America when I finished my doctoral studies, so I was thoroughly formed in the Yankeezada, as it's called, to look at how things appear in the world from an American perspective. But I went to Argentina in 1980, uh, which was at the height of the dictatorship in Argentina. And it was a real experience, what I call even a baptism of fire. The seminary where I taught, Isidad in Buenos Aires, was firebombed on November 22nd of 1980, and we lost hundreds and hundreds of books. Happily, we didn't lose the librarian and his family, but that really solidified my experience. At that point, I became part of the community there because we had all experienced this terrible thing together. But I have at that point made a commitment and have kept to that commitment to continue working in Latin America in one way or another over the long years. And it has been absolutely transformative because you're right. The question you raise in your article is how limited we are in the US because of the monolingual way in which we live. And so we don't know much, most of us don't know much about things that aren't in English. And this is a very serious problem. And those who live I'm looking around, for example, in Germany, um, in certain other parts of Europe, of course, you have a much deeper experience of the many languages. Sheila Curran describes herself as half Peruvian and half Irish. I would say it's probably a third, and there's a third American here for you because you spent many interesting years working here. This makes a big difference. Even in Canada, you can see the difference because of the way in which at least the bilingual approach has forced people, really in a positive way, to see beyond themselves. Let me give you an example, Pui-Lan, in terms of Argentina. You know, when I first went to Argentina, and Francis Kissling is my witness here, Francis Kissling, formerly president of Catholics for Choice. When I went to Argentina, the normative work on abortion was being done in the US. And you know what? We've lost Roe, and the Argentines have gained abortion rights by a very interesting move that we can learn from. The women in Argentina look to us as leaders, and now we look to them. They made several strategic moves on their effort to get abortion rights. They didn't just go to the big cities, they went to the small towns and they talked to rural people. They chose a color, the color green, not purple, which is often the feminist color, but the color green. They could get more green cloth, they said, because green is for health and green is for hope. And it's not the color of any political party. And so they included people, as many as they could. And then they made green scarves, like the ones that the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, the mothers that have disappeared, had worn, the white ones, the handkerchiefs. And when they protested the disappearance of their children. And the women working for abortion rights in Argentina wore the green scarves to tie themselves with the struggle which is the primary struggle for many of those women to find their children and later grandchildren. So I think those things, that attention to smaller details, that looking beyond from looking at the margins, not simply at the center, who knows what that would be like if movements of feminist work, for example, on reproductive justice in the US, took a hint from the Argentines rather than the other way around. So that's one of the things that I see, Pui-Lan. One example.
Yes,
It's very concrete.
indeed. Sometimes people ask me, why do I not lose hope in feminism or resistance movement? I also point to the little things that I have observed. In Africa, for example, I met Pentecostal women talking about patriarchy in their church and society. I have not met younger women from the Pentecostal tradition from Africa talking about that. And then in one of those meetings that I went to, I heard that indigenous women are talking about not Americas, but they want to talk about this land's deep history and the culture and the struggle of indigenous people. I am also deeply touched by some of our friends in Gaza, and especially women among them, talking about peace and justice. So if they do not give up hope, I have no luxury of sitting in Boston and giving up hope. So the fight continues, and we need to pass our wisdom from one generation to another. So Mary, sometimes are you feeling we have less hope than before? I remember when I first came to the United States in the 1980s in grad school, that was the golden time of the gestation or the birth of different kinds of theological discourses. I belong to the generation, Ada Maria Isasi Diaz, and of course a little younger than Dolores Williams and Katie Geneva Cannon, all in blessed memory. And so when we started, it was so exciting. Do you think that feminist theology has changed or remained the same? Or what kind of trajectory you will name, both as you have seen it and also looking into the future?
Yeah, that's a great both tribute to our colleagues, many of whom we could name and many of whom are on here. I see Judith Plasko, I see Sharon Welsh, I see lots of people who've provided incredible leadership over the many years in feminist theology. And I think, feminist theology is just like one little piece of feminist work of the agenda, but it's an important piece because I do think that it makes a difference how we talk about things that are of ultimate meaning and value. And that's what theology pretends to do. And when you think of what Mary Daly and Rosemary Ruther and Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza and Bev Harrison and certainly not just Katie, but so many other, Emily Towns, who's doing such amazing work, Sean Copeland, this is a legacy that for me is more than filled with hope. I mean, it is filled with evidence that things can be different. But they're not going to be different by hanging on to the same old, same old. They're not going to be different by the same old people in leadership. They're not going to be They're not going to be different by a American-centric approach. They're not going to be different if we look to the American Academy of Religion and the Society of Christian Ethics to be the places we need to be looking, as you say, to Pentecostal women. I knew Pentecostal women in Chile 40 years ago, young women who've now become theologians and are bringing a Pentecostal view. I was shocked then. I'm still shocked now. But this is marvelous. I also think that we have to take very seriously that theology has changed and that the right-wing backlash that we're experiencing now from the ignoramuses like J.D. Vance and others who advocate for white Christian nationalism is something that we didn't count on, but that is shaping our agenda now globally because that only gets exported. And we need to be working very, very hard to make clear that that way of doing theology will not work and that going to people's experiences of what they find most meaningful, going to the experiences they have of solidarity, of social change, of doing justice work, those will be the starting points. And that's why your work on post-colonial questions has been so central. The work of womanist theologians, the work of your Pan-Autumn colleagues, the work of queer theologians of many stripes, all of that work is related to, and in some sense is an outgrowth of early feminist, liberationist, Black theology. It's an outgrowth of a lot of that, and certainly is in the same trajectory. And I think that's exciting, but it is absolutely a different kettle of fish than where we started. And may it be different, may it be more different for those who are in the beginning stages of their work in this regard. May it be more different. May it have more ecumenical, interreligious, and non-religious components. Those would be my starting points. Talk to people who aren't involved in religion, but who are spiritual, the spiritual, not religious, to see what they have to say. They have a lot to say that people who are captive in the religious systems, like some of us have been for a long time, they have some other things to say. And I think it's very clear that the leadership of this has to move to the kind of social and spiritual entrepreneurs who are doing work in conjunction with people in the established religious traditions. But the established religious traditions, whether Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, have no corner on the religious market anymore. And that's very interesting to me. And nor should they have any corner on the feminist religious market, as well as the question of people who are not religious at all. So I think it's a whole new ballgame. If I were starting again, rather than studying things Catholic, I would certainly start with a world religions view and then push it out. And that might be a new doctorate for me in later years. We'll see. Pui-Lan, one more thing, or shall we move to our colleagues and engage them in discussion to join us in this conversation? It is really rich already, so I can only imagine it will improve.
Let me just add a few words.
Please do.
Yes, I think that you are absolutely correct, that all of us need to debunk and resist and challenge white Christian nationalism. And some of you might have watched what was happening, America 250. This is really a demonstration of white Christian nationalism on a global level. And so it is very important that we as feminists do not use just a nation as a unit to think about the future of feminist theology or how we are leading feminism. In the last several years, I have been working on developing a
Pui-Lan, you've frozen on us. Pick up when your comes back. Yeah. Perhaps you can go ahead without your video.
Yes. That is this transnational awareness will be very important. We cannot simply go back to doing feminism from the Chinese perspective or the Korean perspective or the Kenyan perspective. We need to be mindful all these local struggles are very much embedded in, related to the global situations. Coming from the background of a colonized person from the British Empire, I see my responsibility of trying to help people understand the British Empire, which I spent my half of my life experiencing, and also American Empire, another half of my life, and of course, the rise of China. So I think we need to have a transnational, and I would call those who are from API background and also those who are interested in what is going to happen in the world to look more deeply into Trans-Pacific and this particular region as it is redefining humanity and the future of the planet for the next decades or so. I think we can stop here. People might have something to contribute from their different contexts. They may have questions as well.
Yes, thank you very much. I think, and I'd like to certainly hear people talk about what I think is one of the uniting issues for us across many, at least many contexts, and that is looking at what nonviolent struggle looks like, and how that I find that for women especially, and perhaps for non-binary people as well, that the idea of stopping violence and stopping especially violence against their children is something that's very a through line that we need to talk about, and that has certainly come very explicitly from womanist theologians and from others who have seen that struggle for survival, not just for rights, but for survival as the key to the work ahead. So I'd like to certainly lift that up at some point. I'd also like to lift up the lack of women's participation in most wars. And I think we're seeing that. We just saw something happen yesterday where the Mr. Hegseth has stopped in their tracks women in military leadership. And I'm not a great proponent of it, but still, to take women and people of color explicitly out of the chain of command is to risk even greater, in my view, world disaster. So those are two issues I'd like to just put on the table. Let's move now to our conversation. Here's how we do it at Water. If you just take your uh, button at the bottom which says react. It's at the bottom of your screen. This is for people who are on the Zoom. Just press that react button and you'll see one choice is to raise your hand. If you would like to get into the conversation, raise your hand. I have done it and it has put me at the top of the queue. When you're finished making your comment, lower your hand and that little symbol is there. If you are unable to do that, can't find it, still want to talk, there's always this. There's always this, the waving of the hand. So you're more than welcome to do that as well. And when we were kids in Catholic schools and we wanted to answer because we were the smartest one in the class and we wanted sister to know we had the answer, we would also beat our chest and say, stir, stir, stir. Stir. Stir was short for sister, and that meant you had the answer. We're not using that technique today. So it's a raised hand in a subtle way, or it's using the react button to raise your hand. The floor is open. And Magdalena is with us. Magdalena Miller from Germany is with us, just finished a year study in Dublin. So she's another one who's living in the experience of not a monolingual way of approaching things, having spent time here at Water. So welcome to you, Wed's colleague. They were interns here together and are now taking over our IT responsibilities. And Magdalena, if you'll keep an eye on the live stream and bring questions from that chat. Floor is open. Let me lower my hand and get out of the way. Please give your name when you start and make your comment. And as we always say, be brief, be witty, and be seated. So we're trying to hear from as many people as we can. Okay. Sheila Kern will be first, and she'll be followed by Renata Rose. First, unmute.
Okay. Well, thank you, Marion. Thank you, Pui-Lan, for all those wonderful thinking and interjections. I suppose I'd concur in three things that you were talking about, and I struggle with trying to do this myself, but it is around women from other religions and other belief systems and working on an interfaith perspective where, the challenges of patriarchy are so strong and coming from very different environments, particularly the Middle East and some African countries, and how it's very difficult to have that dialogue in Ireland at this moment in time in a dominant Christian environment without being seen to override cultural perspectives in the way people organize their lives and families. And I just wonder how one can really look at that wider perspective, as you were saying, because most of my theological work is within a Christian circle, and it's a very much easier space than the interreligious space. That's one. Two, the thing about, I suppose, the whole thing of the environment and how women in poor countries have been the sustainers of trying to call that out, and how that can be another unifying force theologically because of the different indigenous groups that I know, particularly in Latin America, who've come together in a wider circle in protecting of the environment, but also how that brings in the way we care for the earth, the way we care for the environment in which we live, and how the dominance of the abusive mining companies, patriarchal structures, and wealth have done that. And thirdly, it's about war and peacemaking. And from the experiences of women in Northern Ireland and women religious in Northern Ireland, that all the time it's what you said about the women in Gaza, people sustain life in the midst of death all the time, and they do it in the ordinary and everyday. So their theological context is always the ordinary and the everyday to which they try to bring hope, and how that is how we have to try and transform life as well in the ordinary and everyday in the peacemaking systems we can collectively put together and challenge the language and the kind of language that our governments and people in power use that is war language, or how they sustain war environments, whether it is through the tech sectors or otherwise. And I just wanted to bring that piece in. So thank you.
Thank you. And I would underscore that that daily life piece that you just mentioned in terms of where people start was something that Ada Maria Isasi Diaz, of blessed memory, of our Mujerista leader, taught us lo cotidiano, and she wrote about lo cotidiano, the dailiness, the daily life, and that has certainly that tells you something too, that feminist theology was way ahead of these things, and way ahead in terms of time. That there's almost no issue that we didn't pioneer in terms of the concepts. Yes, Renata Rose, you're next. Renata Rose from Germany and the US.
Mood myself to continue this. When I was in the Philippines, my students pointed out that most people just think about survival. They don't have the time to think about global things. They have to think of their daily survival. But what I wanted to say, because I lived for 7 years in the Philippines, and I learned a little of the official language, Tagalog, Filipino it's called now, and this is a non-gendered language, and we have not talked about what it means for people who grow up with a non-gendered language. For example, I learned that the word we read the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the word. The word in Tagalog is balita, but balita means the spoken word. Now imagine the Bible would have written, in the beginning was the spoken word. We wouldn't have all these discussions, what did Jesus really say, etc. It was a living tradition, and I think that's very important. The third point I want to affirm what Mary said about violence. The violence raising in the two-third world is very different from the violence raising here. Here we need, because the most horrendous violence are nuclear weapons. And because they are invisible, most people don't think about it. So the invisibility of violence, I think, needs to be more put forward by the feminist movement in the industrialized countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Very helpful. The floor is open. Yes, Sharon Welch.
Oh, it's so great to see so many of you and to meet people that I haven't seen before. And again, I love the continuation of this energy that we started when we were in grad school, and to see how it's continuing. And one of the things I just want to highlight is a point that both of you have already made. And probably these might be resources that you know already, that the probably all of you know, but the key is how this, moving away from this, Western, even, well-intentioned, domination, Western feminism, but this really radical acceptation of different forms of difference. And I don't know if many of you are aware of if you attended, the webinar that Valerie Carr, with the Revolutionary Love Project did on declaring interdependence, a gathering for the 250th. Anyway, I highly recommend it. Look at the links. And it was based on this book that's just come out, and Baratante Thurston is also there, but Declaring Interdependence. And it's based on an understanding of this book and a movement that's out, American Indigenous Democracy, a call for independence. And it's looking at the wisdom of the Haudenosaunee and their understanding of democracy, which has its core, and come on, my friends, this resonates with us, women at the center of governance, but also you elicit difference and you elicit disagreements and you expect that there are common problems, but there are different ways of solving them. And you learn from those. And another resource that's really important, I mean, the feminist J.K. Gibson Graham and Kelly Dabrowski, the new book there in Diverse Community Economies all over the world. And at the core of these is also indigenous wisdom and different cultures, learning for environmental reciprocity and responsibility. But there are different ways of living that out and what it means to acknowledge those and learn from them as a gift, rather than imposing a solution. And then the last resource, and again, these are all being led by other feminists. And I'm sure many of you've seen her work and do it. And this gets back to nonviolence, Mary. Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan, Why Civil Resistance Matters. And they say nonviolence, the way we defeat ourselves is we can't handle strategic and tactical differences when there are common principles. And our infighting keeps us from working in different ways and working together. And there was just an article in today's New York Times about these kind of basic divisions of the Democratic Socialist of America on just that. So there's a big movement and there's an epistemic shift, again, from being multipolar. Oh, and one last thing. I promise I'll stop. All of these different.
Go right ahead.
There's so much good stuff. I'm on the advocacy council for the community-based global learning collaborative, and Rosemary is here, so she knows some of the work I've done with that, the social transformation fellowship. So Rosemary Carbine, it's great to see you. But one of theirs is moving from service learning, from international coming in to solve problems, and it was already a shift to decolonize, for its community engagement and working together. Well, now it's taken another shift. People from the United States going to other countries, but learning they're doing things better than we are. They're doing better things than we are, both in terms of community economies, living with the environment, and also many of them containing the kind of patriarchal, authoritarian, white Christian violence. And so how do we shift to these kind of collaborative partnerships and continually to learn and grow?
Sharon, thanks so much. Such richness there. I would just remind people that there will be notes from this meeting, and we will include the bibliography. And Sharon, you're welcome to send us just a quick note on that if you want to, or we'll take it from the video. But we will share those resources, so don't worry if you didn't write them down. But there's a great conversation. You're putting your finger on several really important conversations. Let me ask if there's anything from the YouTube channel that we should be paying attention to. Where is Magdalena? Anything in the chat there?
Nope, nothing at all.
Okay, well, let it be an invitation to those who are watching the live stream to put in the chat there anything that they would like to raise here, and we will convey it to the group gathered. So feel free. The floor is open. Pui-Lan, if you want to comment on anything that has been said, feel free.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that Sheila and others mentioned how can we address violence. I began to think more about the violence that we have done to ourselves. And we must resist that. before we have the energy or the qi, the Chinese said, that to tackle the violence in the world. The violence that we have done to ourselves, I constantly needed to resist following the American diet. And that is one of my practice of resistance. And I know that if I continue to eat those food that is high in sugar and salt and fat, that I will not be healthy. I am quite healthy, and that is why I have energy to do so many things. Another form of violence that we might have done to ourselves is to believe the kind of hopelessness, sometimes feeling depression. And sometimes we resort to different ways of handling that form of depression. That is to be aware that we live in a society and a culture that is so deadening. In the last 2 years, how many times we opened to the news, we thought, oh my God, how could that have happened? We could not even believe our eyes sometimes living in the United States. And then so you have the macro level of violence, and then you have micro level of violence. And sometimes we want to retreat to very safe space, not speaking up or to be mindful of our own security. That is very necessary. But I think unless we come up with daily practices, individually and collectively, to develop these forms of resistance at very micro daily level to more macro level, I think that we will feel burnt out or will lose the kind of momentum. Here, I want to share these stories from Starhawk. When I was in grad school, I read some of her work, and then she told about a story that I never forgot. She talked about a person going to the beach to clean up the beach, and people laughed at her or him. Why did you do that? Tomorrow, they will make it dirty again. But this person said, I will not stop doing something good. It is not the consequence. It's I am calling my own agency to resist violence done to myself so that I have the energy and the listening ear and compassion to be able to cross my cultural barrier, my linguistic barrier, to try to understand the pain and suffering of another woman or a non-binary person. These days, I am keeping thinking about how can we replenish our qi, our energy, individually and collectively. Without that, we will not be able to continue in the long haul, isn't it? So I think that when we talk about ecology, when we talk about indigenous people struggle, we must be able to develop that empathy for the earth, for others. But where did the empathy come from if we are daily bombarded with violence ourselves? So I want to ask this critical question to hear if you have your own practice or other ways of keeping on, keeping on.
Thank you for that, because you make what for many people is the personal private. You break that. It's not just the personal is political, but the private is also political in its own way. For example, you're talking about diet and dealing with emotions and so forth, that for many people has not been something to discuss in the public arena. And yet the great movement of feminist vegans and feminist vegetarians, I think of the great Carol Adams of our movement, has really taken account of some of those questions in a very important way. We here at Water have our own little way of resisting, which is that we take August off. And this we've learned from our European friends and others, that we just close the door and lock it, and that's it, goodbye. And we don't take meetings, we don't do any lectures, we don't do anything in the month of August. And now it creeps over into a little bit of July and a little bit of September. So yes, no effort too small to keep ourselves going. And I have to tell you, Kwok, I do have my own resistance technique, which is at night, every night, I go out on my porch with the pan lids. This is from the 1800s in France, banging the pan lids as a way of protesting. It's been used for lots of things all over the world. I do this every night. I made a vow that I would do it until the armed National Guard were gone from DC. At that point, they were going to be here about 6 weeks. They're now going to be here until the next election. I'll be here too with my pan lids. Just picture me with my pan lids, like the crazy lady down the street. What is she doing? I'm calling attention to the fact that something is so radically wrong that we have to notice it every single day. So that's one, I think, in the line with what you're talking about. Shannon, please go ahead, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Shannon Kragosnell. I am a theologian living in Kentucky. I am ridiculously grateful, Kwok, for the phrase baby practices. Letty Russell, when I would get discouraged, would talk about we need to work, we move in little chicky steps. And she did a little chicky step dance, right? And somehow chicky steps had not translated into the kind of minute baby practices. And so that is a gift to me. You also mentioned hope and hopelessness. And one of the things that is being sold at high volume in the US right now is despair. And the notion that there is no hope, when people say this is just like Nazi Germany, I understand that you're trying to call attention to something, but that has a foregone conclusion. So it's being sold at high volume by both the left and the right. And I feel like feminist theology has something very real to offer in this context, in that from various religious perspectives. So I'm speaking from a Christian perspective. We have good news. We believe that something new is possible, that there are alternatives. And so I feel like hopefulness in any form right now is one of those baby practices. So thank you, Kwok, again, as always, for so many things.
Thank you. Magdalena, anything from the YouTube?
No, not yet.
Okay. Floor is open again. Anyone who'd like to add something? Yes, Barbara Anderson, please, from New York, now Philadelphia. Unmute, please.
In Philadelphia, I might mention there is a very local struggle about how we describe the house where George Washington, I didn't know this until I moved here, but George Washington actually lived as president of the United States in Philadelphia for 2 years. And there's been quite a local struggle here about how to describe the relationship with slavery, and the fact that he had slaves that he had doing his chores in his house. So that it has been to me another example that the local is often different than we imagine it to be.
Interesting. Yep. Other questions, comments? I have one actually, but I want to hold it. I don't want to cut off anybody who'd like to speak before, but I do have one that maybe will raise a few questions, if not eyebrows. That has to do with the question of men. Pui-Lan, I'm looking at you on this. What is there any rise to, does anybody see a rise in the world of male feminists? Is there an effort of men to get involved? I mean, after, let's say, 50 years, just to be conservative, certainly in theology, I haven't seen anything like a rise of men adding their voices, understanding their feminism, the way in which, for example, some of us have tried to be not just white allies, but white advocates around issues of racism. So it can be done, it can be learned. People from outside of the most affected group can, in fact, find ways that are not trivial or insulting to be part of movements. Have you seen that? I mean, if it does translating global feminism, can we build a global movement, include men? I think it includes non-binary people to the ranks of those who identify as feminists. But doesn't it? Have you seen it in any of those places you've been visiting? Anybody else? Is this something? I mean, could working with men be part of the risk-taking to which you refer in your final question in your article? It never occurred to me before. It's certainly not something I know much about, but and may not, in fact, make my focus by any stretch. But I'm just wondering, informationally, has there been any concomitant increase of participation of persons who are identified as male in our movements?
Since I have been in theological education for decades, I certainly noticed different approaches or reactions to feminism. That is, it was very new 40 years ago. But now, many colleagues in their syllabus or in school's curriculum, they will introduce feminist theology. And so I think some of the students, they were exposed to it. And I would say the upcoming generation, they may not be so stuck in the gender stereotypes of the past. So I see hope there. But unfortunately, I also have a former student who is doing a PhD dissertation on the masculinity in Korea, not in the United States. And talking about this toxic masculinity is also attracting young people who want to assert their gender identity. So he is trying to provide pastoral resources for churches to handle that particular phenomenon. And so I think I am cautiously optimistic. That is, there is movement, but a lot of work still needs to be done.
Yes, I hope you're right. I'm looking at the phenomenon in the US, especially among younger Christian men who are attracted to some of this white Christian nationalism. And for the first time, statisticians show us that the participation of young white men in the Christian world, in the Christian circles in the US, is higher than that of young white women. And that is a really big change. And frankly, one that scares the wits out of me, because not only are women leaving with their children and their checkbooks, but men are taking over that arena which women, that space that women leave open for good reasons, in my view. But boy, that really isn't what I had hoped for. Magdalena, let's hear from you, and then I'm going to close us, and then I'm going to continue the conversation after the announcements. Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to add from the YouTube chat, Alison Webster was talking about positive work in the UK on composting masculinity, including Al Barrett and Will Moore, who are brilliant in the work they do. So I think that was meant as one of the good examples of men working with feminists and as allies.
Great, and thank you to Alison. Alison Webster, longtime dear friend and colleague, and is very much involved in those kinds of movements. So maybe we need to have a session with Alison Webster one of these days. That would be my great pleasure. Let me simply thank you for your participation up until this moment and make a couple of brief announcements, and then those who need to leave because it's the top of the hour will be able to do so gracefully, and the rest of us will continue in conversation for a few minutes if we wish. So let me simply say that we are delighted that you've been part of this program. We invite you to other programs. Water programs are always free, open to everyone. We do not charge a fee. We welcome donations, of course, but we have found over the long years that the best way to handle these questions is that if we share together, there's enough. And in the history of water, which is now more than 40 years, because people have shared so generously, there has always been enough. The key, of course, is if we share. And everybody on this program today has shared time and energy and talent. So we have shared, and there's been enough, and we will continue to do that at Water without any interest in fee or ways of financing this. We're very gifted by generous donors, some of whom are here present. Also, the last water program for the season will be next Tuesday, the 21st of July, celebrating international friendships. So this picks up a theme because Global International Day of Friendship is July 30th, and Diane New and colleagues in the ritual group will have a party. Friendship is a gift that is available to each of us, and friends are some of them with us for a lifetime, some of them come in and out of our lives, but that group will honor the friendships among us, and especially those among us in water. So feel free to join that 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday, July 21st, the water ritual celebrating international friendships. As I said earlier, we always close for August and the early part of September. This summer break is something we've learned from more civilized cultures than our own. And so we will see you without apology in the fall. And that's really part of the both self-care and complete community care that has kept water going for many, many years. You know, if the one year we didn't do it by the holiday period in December, we were fried in butter, really. We just couldn't do much more. So we learned the hard way. Let me therefore thank everybody who's been with us. Particular thanks to Kwok Pui-Lan, to Kwok and Roll, to people who are part of that conversation, and we're so happy to have them with us. And again, if you want to be part of water programs, you are more than welcome. And I urge you to go to Kwok and Roll and to see the interviews and the Substack writing that Kwok Pui-Lan is doing, that I think is really, along with Susan Thistlethwaite's work, which is just tremendous as well. Those are two really deeply rooted feminist theological Substacks that I would not miss myself. So for another faithful provocation, thank you from Water and from Kwok Pui-Lan, and let us bid adieu to those who must leave now at the top of the hour, and we'll leave the conversation open, and it is now open for your continued discussion. And I'd like to see where it goes. What's next? Please go ahead. Don't, Magdalena, you might have a comment.
Oh yes, I'm just typing someone recommended a book, Jesus and John Wayne by Christine Dumez. I'm just putting the name into the chat, and we will add it to the notes.
Exactly. Great. Anyone else? Other topics that we need to, or something more here to say? Please go ahead. Yeah. Sharon again, and then Renata.
One of the things, again, I want to thank Pui-Lan, you for making this obvious, is not only this importance of acknowledging differences and being open to real changes, and in kind of like a global world that's really multipolar and isn't the colonialism, but also doing this from the position of being an elder and finding different ways of acknowledging strengths and limits and how we can do creative eldering. Thank you. And I don't know if you've written on that. If you have, I'd love to look at it and your ongoing reflections of what it means to move into that stage. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon.
Yes, Sharon, you'd have a lot to say about that, and you're doing that yourself. It's obvious. Susan Thistlethwaite is doing that herself as well. And remember, it was Gloria Steinem who said no to the young woman who wanted her to pass her torch. She said, no, I'm not going to pass you my torch because I'm not finished with it yet, but I'll give you a light. And I've always
forgot that. I love it.
I've always loved that. Karen, you have your hand up. A warm welcome to you. Unmute, please. Yep.
There. Hello, Kwok Pui-Lan.
Hey.
I was really taken by what you said about the diet. And and the diet is one physical. And I believe if I watch TV very long, that's part of the diet I need to go on. But also the substances that we ingest, but also what we ingest spiritually and um, ingest the thriller kind of message. My deeper question is, I like this, I like the notion, I don't like it. I mean, there's this tension between hope and I feel resistance and resilience. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about that for strengthening us.
Karen, thank you very much. Some of us know that McGill de la Torre always challenged when we said hopeful, because he wrote about embracing hopelessness. And he was addressing people who were just at the bottom, and then they might not have the luxury of being hopeful. So a group of us went to his school to celebrate his publication, and we shared our ideas. And so what does even embraced hopelessness mean? He was talking about people who have their back against the wall. And so what kind of practices that they do? And I think that that is a very important question for me, because we jump to eschatology, or so to speak, Easter, without thinking about Saturday. And those of us who have the either status or space for being a little bit hopeful, how can we hear the hopeless voices? For example, it's very difficult to face those group of women who were abused by Epstein and their friends, just to see their courage. That is, they continue for decades to fight. And just other people in Sudan, for example, continue these long struggles against war and ethnic violence. And for me, I don't think we need to be hopeful or feeling very optimistic all the time. That we allow ourselves to have a full range of human emotions and to tell ourselves that is okay too. And that is why if we give ourselves permission, that sometimes we don't need to be all right. And one of the cultural shock in America is the assumption everybody needs to be both young and happy, energetic. Well, in other cultures, you don't need to be. But here, sometimes even me needs to put up a performance. How are you? I don't want to tell them the laundry of things that is happening in my life, for example, isn't it? But to have a moment to be true yourself, that it is part of human living. When I feel less than hopeful, that means at least I am still in touch of the basic reality of humankind, isn't it? And then growing up in a Buddhist family really helps, talking about interreligious learning. Then the Buddha said, well, life is suffering too. If you do not expect all this joy, optimistic, hopefulness as the cultural logic, and then it gives me a space, at least, to process those feelings that maybe too much Christian theology will suppress that. Let me just say it. And I know that, you see, Karen, you are an artist. Yes, that you have also found art to help, I think, yes.
Thank you.
I wanted to say that I have never seen a hopeless indigenous woman. Whenever I listen to indigenous women, they have a wonderful way of being so conscious of their environment and being so grateful for the beauty of the environment. I recently heard a talk about how, by a woman, I now forgot her name, but she is a healer, and she heals through beauty, through pointing out the beauty. And I think that's wonderful. But what I wanted to come back to is mainly the difference in context of those countries who have nuclear weapons and those who have not. 90 countries in the world have signed the Treaty on the Prohibition, the International Treaty of the United Nations on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So those countries, at least their parliaments or Congress and Senate, were aware how important it is to prohibit, to have nuclear weapons, to produce nuclear weapons. But I think the 9 countries who have them, does the feminist movement integrate this so that people are aware that $1 trillion is now spent on the Pentagon? I don't think people know this. So we could be more provocative when it comes to violence, and the worst violence and the most hypocritical violence that men have organized. Thank you.
Hear, hear. Anyone else before we complete our conversation? Would anyone else like to make a comment? Feel free.
I just wanted to say thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Karen.
It's good to be in your company.
Thank you very much for everyone for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Pui-Lan and I are especially grateful because this was an experiment, and we will now analyze it. And our artificial intelligence, Annie, will analyze it, and we'll ask for people's responses who were on the YouTube, and we'll see if we ever do it again. But I think it was a faithful provocation, and you've all made it work. So thank you.
I have a quick question. How many people were watching on YouTube? Do you know?
That would be Magdalena. There were more than 30 of us on here.
Yeah.
So that's clear. But Magdalena, do you have a sense?
It was not too popular. I think it was around 5 to 10 people.
Okay.
Okay.
So more traffic on Zoom, yes.
Okay. That's helpful. Yeah. And also we're trying to see what the audience we'll do some study of that. But it's fun, for those of us who've been at this a while. It's really fun to try something new. And we are led by our tech people, and we'll see where we go. But thank you all. It's great. It's just wonderful.
You.